Okay, so it was last year at the age of 44 when I was formally diagnosed with autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. And I know what you're thinking, I don't look like I am. But I promise you, I am over 40. It is not uncommon these days for adults to be discovering their neurodivergence so late on in life, especially when their traits don't appear in traditional expectations. Whether that's due to gender, race, sexuality, or like me, co-occurring conditions. There are various different aspects that can make traits appear differently and harder to diagnose. But looking back, the signs were definitely there. And it turns out being a developer is actually pretty good camouflage for being neurodivergent. So the stereotypical view of a developer with headphones on, head down, focusing on a problem, probably grunting when you ask them something, so not particularly good at communication. But all of these things are generally just considered quirks and not necessarily red flags. In tech, it tends to be just part of the culture. But camouflage for me started a long time ago. As a kid, I was a pretty quiet child, wasn't particularly big on words. I have two older sisters. They were happy to do all the talking, and I was pretty happy to let them. I had a small group of friends, but really, I much preferred my own company. I was happiest playing on my own. I was pretty creative, liked doing crafts, making things. I also liked taking things apart just to kind of figure out how they worked. And when I grew up, I just really wanted to be an inventor. At the age of 7, I got my first taste of computers when I received a Sinclair ZX Spectrum 24K 2+A, I think. But of course, I played the games, but it was the introduction to code, that would ultimately be life-changing for me, even though I didn't know just then. Going into education, it was very much shaped by my interests and very much a tale of two halves. So the subjects that didn't challenge me or that I found boring, stuff like English, history, and geography, I just couldn't get on with at all. But in the subjects around my interests, so creativity and stuff that was intellectually challenging, so art, maths, IT, they're the subjects that I really excelled in. When I moved on into higher education and college and university, this is when I really realized that code was what I could combine all of those interests in. It gave me a place that I was intellectually challenged, but I could be creative at the same time. It's also in education that I realized I could actually kind of make money from some of this stuff. So that's when I moved into my career, worked at various different agencies, did different contract gigs, and just honed my skills as a web developer. But I always remember during this time that I made a very conscious decision that, for me, it wasn't about the money. Obviously, I had bills to pay, but it wasn't about making as much money as I possibly could, and it wasn't particularly about climbing the corporate ladder. I was always just trying to find a place where I felt happy, felt comfortable, and I could do the things that I loved doing. But really, I just struggled to find it, and my CV just ended up being full of a whole list of different jobs, and it just left my head full of questions. So the coding side of things I loved and could really kind of get stuck into. But the business side, all the different processes, the work environment, the travel, the social aspects, they were just all things that I struggled with. And it felt like everybody else just had a rule book that I didn't seem to have access to. So this is when I decided to start my own company, Outfield Digital. My wife Lucy came on board as well. And this worked great for me. I was in full control of my environment, had my office set up exactly how I needed it. I did all the coding side. Lucy did the client services side, so did majority of talking to customers. And yeah, it just allowed me to focus and not have to deal with all the other aspects that I found challenging. So when I was looking for kind of explanations as to why I seemed to need to work this way, the first thing that came up was introversion. So it was actually at a Codegarden, Erica Quisenbury, I can never say her last name, but I think that's okay. She did a talk and she recommended a book called The Introvert Advantage. And that was, to me, quite a groundbreaking book at the time. It gave me a lot of answers to a lot of things, and more importantly, it gave me a lot of tools. And I thought this is what kind of answered what I was feeling and it just felt like it gave me the answers. It answered things like my struggles with social energy, my preference of working alone, and just my quiet nature in general. And so I thought this was just who I am. This was my identity. I'm just an introvert. Great. But next came our acquisition. So Outfield Digital was acquired by Umbraco. And from the outside world, everything looked to be the same. I still got to work from home, so still had control over my environment. I was working in a great culture. I've obviously been around Umbraco for a long time now, and I love that culture. And Umbraco took away majority of the meetings, so I'm still not kind of getting contacted by customers every day. And yet I started to notice little frictions. And I realized that I'm just not as in control as I was before. So whether that's how I use my time, or the processes that I now need to follow, or just the fact that I now have a team and it's not just my own time that I need to kind of manage, I need to help other people in the team as well. And so all of this just brought on stress and anxieties of having to deal with those. And when I looked back to introversion, looking for answers and looking for solutions to the problems that I'm facing, the tools that I'd learned weren't giving me what I needed and weren't allowing me to kind of get over these things or find ways to manage them. And so really I started to expand my search and see where else I could find answers. And this is when I discovered neurodivergence. Initially, I looked into autism, so there's a lot of crossover with autism and introversion. But again, it didn't fully answer everything. So I spread my search a little wider, started looking into different neurotypes, and could see elements of myself in these different neurotypes. So I found myself kind of plucking from the different types and just figuring out who I was. And it came with a lot of imposter syndrome, like it felt like I was just plucking bits out and trying to make the best out of it all. But when I followed the advice and the suggestions that came with those, I saw that they definitely helped. So in the end, I decided that I wanted an external perspective so that I could ultimately just validate what I felt about myself. And so that's when I got my diagnoses, and then suddenly everything kind of, I gave myself permission to realize that that is what's going on, and it helped solve a lot of problems. Or really, it just made me see that it was no longer just a story about a quiet developer, and neither was it a career path. This was actually a survival strategy, a whole series of unconscious self-accommodations that I'd made to make myself feel comfortable both at work and at home, even though I didn't particularly know why at the time. But I now find myself back in that space, trying to figure out my needs, trying to figure out the tools and the strategies in order to be able to manage. However, this time, I know exactly why I need them. But taking a step back, I've also noticed that a lot of other people in the community seem to be going through similar things as well. And so my talk today, I wanted to try and have a look at what could we do in the workplace to make things a little bit more comfortable and accommodating to people like me. So whether that's people who are neurotype or suspect they're neurotypical, then hopefully some of the suggestions today will help. So hi, I'm Matt Brailsford. I work at HQ on the Umbraco Commerce product. If you were expecting an Umbraco Commerce talk, I'm sorry, this is not this one. It's out there. But yeah, obviously I'm here today just talking about something a little bit more personal to myself. I will say I am not an expert on this. I've obviously done a lot of research to know me a little bit better, but hopefully the stuff that I have learned will, as I say, potentially be useful for others as well. But also, forgive me if I do make any mistakes on it. So I guess it's a good place to start is what exactly is neurodiversity, and fundamentally it's all about the brain and how it works. And for a long time it was thought that all brains ultimately worked the same, and if they didn't, then that was something that needed to be fixed or repaired or brought back in line so that everybody's of a standard type. However, the idea of neurodiversity is that the differences in how people think, learn, and process information are actually natural variations of the human mind, and these should be supported and appreciated for exactly what they are and what they bring. A good analogy that works for me is thinking about people running on different operating systems. So where a neurotypical person might run on Windows, then we can think of neurodivergent folk running on Linux. To the outside world, these things do very similar things. They run software, they run applications, but underneath, they're really different in how they do it, and they're not directly interoperable. And when thinking about neurodiversity, there are lots of different neurotypes, and it's often said that that is on a spectrum, but I find that quite linear. So if I follow this analogy a little further, we can kind of think of neurotypes as different Linux distributions. So all of these things are ultimately Linux, they run on the same kernel, but each distribution is a distinct packaging of particular features, or we can think of them as traits within neurodiversity. Some of these distributions share the same features, but all of these are just like pre-packaged types of neurodivergence. But we could be here a long time just going through all the different neurotypes, so I think the thing to focus on more is probably the traits themselves, because it's within the traits that these have the greater workplace impact. So I'd just like to go through a few different traits. We'll see how they potentially manifest and also what the potential opportunities are in the workplace. This is by no means an exhaustive list, it's just a few, probably some of the ones that you're most likely to kind of hear about. So the first one is hyperfocus, and this is something that's often really admired in developers, and it's that ability to just get into that state of flow or intense focus on a particular problem. But with hyperfocus, this can be at the detriment to other things, and you can literally lose track of time. So in the workplace, that could mean forgetting to attend meetings or forgetting commitments. In your personal life, that might be, or within health, that might be that you forget to drink, forget to eat, or if you're working late at night, you might even just forget to go to bed. You're so intensely focused on what you're working on. But with the right support, then this can be really beneficial in the workplace, because these people can think so intensely and go so in depth that they can find solutions that other people wouldn't be able to find. Next is sensory sensitivity, and this is having real discomfort from sensory inputs. So think of having your dials on your sensors just set to 11 constantly. So it's not about being picky, it really is about true overwhelm from these inputs. So that could be things from textures like clothing, how things feel touching your body. It could be strong smells or lighting, like strip lighting is a very common kind of cited sensory input issue for neurodivergent types. But with this heightened perception comes an incredible attention to detail, and the solutions are also, more often than not, very human-centered. So, yeah, people with sensory sensitivity are the ones that will notice all of those important edge cases. Next is literal thinking, or black and white thinking, or binary thinking, and this can often cause a bit of confusion at work, especially when with vague instructions, and literal thinkers can often be cited as asking too many questions. So they're really just seeking as much clarity and information as possible. So in a team dynamic, that could feel like somebody's just constantly playing devil's advocate when other people seem to have got what's being talked about. But yeah, they might just try and get more information that they feel that they need. But with this, or on the flip side, on the opportunity, these people can write clearly, think precisely, and cut through any ambiguity, which, when you start to think about documentation and writing specifications, can be of real benefit. Next is pattern recognition. So this is the innate ability to spot connections and find inconsistencies in things. But the challenge here is that we can often get stuck on those inconsistencies. So think of opening a code file and finding it's a mixture of tabs and spaces. You just physically can't move on until you've rectified the problem by setting it all to spaces. But equally, again, a strong sense of pattern recognition can be really useful for things like debugging, spotting regressions, and seeing trends in things in code bases and systems. And then lastly, a need for routine. And this is one I didn't really realize affected me as much as it did. I thought this was needing like every hour of every day, kind of like set out. But for me at least, this is more about structure and predictability and seeing how the day was meant to pan out. And if something big comes along and really disrupts that, then that can be a big problem, and for me that can lead to like shut down and just not be able to deal with like the situation at all. But again, people with a strong need for routine trait, these are the people that are capable of building order out of chaos, so they can design processes or make things much more consistent and more reliable. So this is just a handful of different traits. Like, as I say, there are way more than this. And as you can see, they all have potential challenges, but equally they have some really strong opportunities. But the problem is you can't realize the opportunities unless you're willing to support the needs as well. But the problem is that many workplaces are not designed to offer that kind of support. In fact, many reward conformity and penalize deviation. And so the internalized message that neurodivergent folk get is don't be different. Being different is a risk. And when people are faced with that risk, they ultimately have to do what they need to do to survive. And this often means masking. So masking is the hiding of their traits to fit social and workplace norms. It's important to realize or know that this is not about deception, it's all about safety, avoiding judgment, exclusion, and potential punishment or bullying. It's also important to know that this hides real needs. The irony is, the better somebody gets at masking, the harder it is for them to get their needs met. People seem to think that you've managed so long without needing support, why do you suddenly need it? You function perfectly fine, but now you're at a stage where you're finally willing to stand up and ask for help. People don't believe that you need it. And as you might think, putting that amount of effort into things can be truly exhausting, both cognitively and emotionally. And with spending so much time and energy on keeping that mask going, it's no surprise that this can lead to mental health issues. Anxiety and burnout are extremely common, and even going further into depression. And with so many companies not being set up to offer the support needed, it's no surprise that this is an extremely common practice. If we go back to the software analogy then, the way I like to think of masking is like running software in emulation. So for a Windows user, they get to use the software or the application that they're expecting to use. It functions exactly how they need to use it. But underneath, it's just burning much more CPU, much more memory, and potentially burning out the battery sooner. So for that Windows user, it's the exact experience they were expecting, but it comes at a potential cost. And so it's not surprising then that the stats paint a particularly sad picture. And it is estimated that 70% of neurodivergent people are actually unemployed because of the difficulties of maintaining or getting the support they need in the workplace. Of those that are actually in employment, 76% decide not to disclose their diagnoses. And yet, at the same time, it is suspected that 1 in 7 people are actually neurodivergent. And so it's potentially a much bigger thing than people might realize. So what exactly is the solution then? Because masking works until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, you've ultimately burnt out your employees, and that's not a particularly good place to be. So what can we do to make the workplace much more neurodivergent friendly and allow people or afford people to be able to mask less? And the answer to that is accommodations. So accommodations are making small changes to help someone do their best work in a way that works for them. It is not about lowering standards, and it is not about giving special treatment. After all, you wouldn't ask somebody to remove their glasses because it gives them an unfair visual advantage compared to somebody with 20/20 vision. It's all about leveling the playing field. The good news is, with some small changes, you can make a big impact in people's lives. And so right now, I'd just like to go through a few different categories with a few potential suggestions of what types of accommodations could be made. So we'll start with flexibility, because with neurodivergent folk, we often have different energy fluctuations, different abilities to focus, or struggle with executive function, and when that meets rigid systems, it can be problematic. So the first suggestion I would give is look at offering flexible hours. So whether, as I say, neurodivergent people can often have different energy levels, whether that's due to burnout or whether they've just come out of a period of time blindness and don't have the energy for other things. Just being able to choose or work when their energy levels are highest can be really beneficial. So tying somebody to the desk between 9 to 5 and expecting them to do their best work when their energy levels might only kick in the last couple of hours at work is not going to do anybody any kind of favors. If you allow people to choose when's best for them, then they can make maximum use of their particular energy levels. Additionally, maybe things like just staggering starting and end times to avoid rush hour. Rush hour can be an extremely sensory-intensive period of time, so you might have people get into the workplace already extremely anxious and burnt out just by having to travel to work in the first place. So all of this is ultimately just trying to reduce anxiety and let people work when they work best. Next is allowing people to work from home, either on a full-time or part-time basis. I think after COVID, we all realized just how little people needed to be in the office to actually still be productive. And for many neurodivergent people or people who suspected they were neurodivergent, then that time at home during COVID was potentially a revelation. But in the home environment, people get to have full control over their sensory inputs, their work setup. They've got everything they need access to. They can reduce distractions. They don't have to be masking constantly, so they don't have that social fatigue of having all the workmates around. And yeah, ultimately reduces their need to mask and reduces that potential risk of burnout. And then lastly, try and focus on outcome-based goals. So it's not about how something gets done, but about what gets done. So by all means, have a sprint and decide what's going to get done in that particular time frame, but allow people to kind of control when they kind of do that work. It's similar to the flexible hours in terms of their energy levels. Sitting them at 9 to 5 and expecting them to be productive is not particularly a good way of managing those goals. So yeah. So it's not just about when things get done, but also where. So the work environment can be very overwhelming, a lot of sensory input, full of constant distractions, and all of that can derail someone's entire day. So a few ideas here are allowing people control or sensory control over their environment. So that might be having relaxed dress codes, allowing people to wear comfortable clothing, not having to wear restrictive or itchy, uncomfortable uniforms. Control over lighting, as I say, strip lighting is generally not particularly good, so having like individual lighting with dimmable features and things to allow people to set their light levels to what they're comfortable with, and potentially offering quieter work environments as well, or if you can't offer that, then making things like noise-cancelling headphones accessible to allow people to block out excessive noise. All of this is for reducing sensory overwhelm and helping with self-regulation and maintaining focus. Next is, are you also able to offer enclosed workspace? So open plan offices became the norm for some reason, but these are just absolutely full of distraction and sensory overwhelm. People getting up, people holding conversations in the middle of the office, like eating like fish at the work desks and stuff like that. Just all things that can just be completely overwhelming. So I'm not saying give everybody their own individual offices, but even small groups in enclosed spaces where they can block out the majority of distractions that are going on in the workplace can be really quite useful. This helps create a safe space that's predictable and helps promote focus. And then lastly, try and avoid using hot desking. Hot desking can provide, again, a level of anxiety of not knowing where you're going to be working, or you're going to have access to the tools that you need to be able to do your job. And yeah, you just don't, it just brings so much uncertainty. So by providing people with dedicated space, it brings consistency, control over the workplace because they can set it up exactly how they need, and ultimately reduces anxiety as well. So at some point you are going to have to talk to somebody. It's unavoidable in the workplace, and communication can be a real barrier, but the goal here is just all about clarity. So the first suggestion is personal manuals. So I heard about this last year from Yoka in your talk, predominantly about remote work, but I actually thought it was really quite useful for neurodivergent people. And the idea of a personal manual is to create like a one-sheet document that really just details what your needs are, when you work best, how you prefer to give feedback, how you prefer to receive feedback. And the idea is that if everybody does this in the company, then everybody's got a perfect guide of how you deal with everybody else, and you know how to communicate more effectively. But the great thing for neurodivergent people is that you don't need to divulge your neurodivergence. If everybody's doing it, it's just a standard. So this really just helps reduce any burden of constantly self-advocating for your needs. Next is try and prefer async communication. So this might be dependent on somebody's particular personal manual, but just in general, using async communication just gives people additional time to think about what is being said and formulate a more meaningful response. People might suffer with verbal processing skills, and trying to process what is being said whilst also trying to think of an answer can be challenging, and throw masking into that fact as well when you're doing one-to-one and face-to-face. Yeah, just by giving people that time up front to think about it means you're just going to get a much better response than you are face-to-face. And then lastly, when defining tasks and creating work, make sure that you're just really clear as possible with these. Generally following the what, when, and why. So what do you need, when do you need it, and why do you need it can be a really good strategy. The why can be a little subjective. Some people think, why do you need to say why? It's just a task, get it done sort of thing. But for many neurodivergent people, understanding context and the bigger picture is really important to be able to build motivation and build focus in buy-in on the particular task. So yeah, just being super clear about what is expected. And probably one of the hardest places for communication is in meetings, and this can be a real minefield. It's full of real-time pressures, a lot of sensory overload, and often very unclear expectations. So a few suggestions. One is before the meeting, always make sure that you have an agenda detailing exactly what is going to be covered and what the expectations are. Also, if you're going to present any material, again, provide that up front so people have time to review it. And this just helps people with slower processing skills, or maybe they have anxiety from being in group meetings. Then, yeah, it just allows people to think and come to the meeting well prepared rather than having to think things up on the spot. In general, I follow the rule of no agenda, no meeting. So, yay. Next is, if you do do online meetings, then make it acceptable to attend without turning your video on. Actually, Zoom meetings can often be much harder for people to mask. So people's masking abilities are often based around reading the other person, and online, you've got much fewer kind of signals to read, so it ultimately means they're just working a heck of a lot harder. So by allowing people to opt out of video, maybe they just want to do it via voice, or maybe they just want to interact via chat, they can still contribute, but you help reduce any performance anxiety and any sensory fatigue of having to constantly be on. And it ultimately respects people's comfort levels. So next is, after the meeting, make sure to provide a written recap. Anybody that has memory issues or attention challenges could really easily miss parts of a meeting. So after the meeting, just be super clear about what was said, what the expectations are, and then there's no confusion. And lastly, try and provide additional time after meetings for people to provide feedback. This happens to me all the time. I'm in a meeting, somebody asks for feedback, and I've got nothing. But as soon as the meeting's over, a load of different ideas come into my mind, and I wish that I'd said them in the meeting. But just by giving people additional time afterwards allows for that additional feedback to come back. So it doesn't just, accommodations don't just appear in the workplace. They appear before people even start work there. So this is in the hiring process and onboarding processes as well. And here you're just trying to make sure that you're not being unintentionally exclusionary, and that the whole hiring process is as equitable for everybody as can be. So the first thing I would suggest is make sure that your job ads are really clear, especially separating out what are essential versus nice to have skills. People with black and white thinking or literal thinking are very good at self-excluding themselves if they don't feel they meet 100% of the criteria. So they might meet 99% of what's being asked for, but if they don't meet one of the things that's on the job listing, then they'll just exclude themselves automatically. So by being clear about what is essential versus nice to have, you can avoid that situation and allow people to just focus on the relevant skills and qualifications. Next is when you're holding interviews, similar to meetings, if you're going to be asking questions, try and provide those questions up front. Similar with any exercises, can you provide those before the interview as well? And much for the same reason as the meetings, the challenge of being face-to-face can cause a lot of anxiety, so allowing people to come prepared means they've got the answers, and you're getting a much more realistic picture of that person rather than how they perform in a stressful situation. Next is, when you do hire people, can you implement a buddy system? This helps with support and provides psychological safety, so they've got somebody that they can go to and ask questions of. They also provide peer insight, so all those unwritten rules that are not necessarily in the employee handbook, they have somebody to go to and get that advice. And lastly, providing an onboarding checklist to just be really clear about what is expected when people do start their job. It prevents people from, if people struggle with memory issues, then it's super clear, it's all detailed out, and yeah, it's just similar to the task list as well, just being clear about what the expectations are. But all of this means nothing if people don't feel safe enough to actually ask for help. So it's important to create a culture with psychological safety in mind. So first, try and normalize asking for accommodations. So you want to try and reduce stigma, be proactive, and just reduce the burden of people having to constantly self-advocate. So yeah, just get people asking for help if you can. Next is educate your leaders and your staff. So this helps promote understanding, reduces any bias, and ensures that any changes that you do make are systemic rather than just one-off instances. Next, try and avoid penalising people for not attending social events. So by all means, hold social events, but if you're talking shop at work and you follow that into the social environment and people are missing out on opportunities because they prefer not to attend, then that can be a real problem. So yeah, just try and make sure that social events are just that, social, and don't affect people's career opportunities. And then lastly, try and make sure that you celebrate the neurodivergent wins as well. It would be really easy to focus on the challenges of implementing accommodations, but make sure that when you just celebrate the wins. So if somebody manages to solve a bug that nobody else has been able to get to the bottom of, or if somebody implements a process that's saving you thousands of euros a month, then make sure that you celebrate that as well and don't just focus on the challenges. So lastly, I'll just go through a few different tools that are useful to make available in the workplace. So we've got a few software and hardware options here. Some of these I'm reluctant to, given James's talk earlier about AI, but hey. But there's things like Otter AI, which can be quite useful for summarizing online meetings, so it will transcribe that into writing. So if somebody struggles with keeping notes during a meeting, it can do a real-time transcription. Grammarly, useful for people who struggle with writing, so it can offer grammar and spell checking advice. Dragon, if somebody struggles with writing, then Dragon is voice recognition software, so they can just dictate to their computer and it will convert that to text. Google Meet offers live closed captioning, so if people struggle with verbal processing skills, then you can have live captioning so people can read what's actually being said in real time as well. Audible, if people struggle with reading, then Audible gives access to audiobooks so they can still progress their learning that way. Access to ChatGPT or Claude can also be really useful. I use it a lot for helping me formulate things that I need to say, but also understanding what people are saying to me. So if a conversation's not clear what's being said, I might ask ChatGPT to say, read between the lines and what's the actual meaning here. So it can be good for finding clarity in conversations. On the hardware side, access to digital note-taking tools. So if people struggle with memory, they might often want to write things down and keep track of things that way. So access to iPads, remarkable pads can be useful. Again, if they prefer not to write, dictaphones, maybe they prefer to take audio notes instead. Noise-cancelling headphones we mentioned earlier in terms of helping with reducing noise levels in the workplace. Height-adjustable desks. Many neurodivergent people need to constantly be moving, don't feel comfortable in one particular spot all the time, so being able to adjust and adapt throughout the day can be beneficial. Desk timers, particularly if we do struggle with time blindness, then being able to sandbox particular time and get notifications when we need to move on to other things can be of use. And then access to STEM toys. So I haven't really talked about STEM toys, but STEM toys are often used to help reduce anxiety levels. So this is things like access to fidget spinners or stress squeezy toys type of things. All of these things can just help focus the mind on something else and help reduce anxiety. So giving access to those and making it acceptable for people to be using those can be a real benefit. So that's been a lot of things to go through. So I couldn't remember all of that, so I've actually put a printed sheet together with all the things that I've covered today, along with a few other suggestions as well. So you can scan the QR code and access that. I will show the QR code at the end as well, in case you missed it. So in closing, I hope you can see that accommodations don't just appear in one place. They appear across policies, across culture, and the everyday choices that are made in a company. But with a few key principles, if you keep these in mind, I think it will really help when implementing accommodations. So the first of those is that there is no such, this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. A very common phrase is that if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person. Like, no neurodivergent person is the same. So neither are their accommodation requirements going to be. So I've made a few suggestions today. I'm sure people might come forward with other needs that they might have. But yeah, just consider this a menu. But if you really start talking to your employees, just make sure that you do so with empathy. Like, ask what would help you do your best work, and then listen to their response, like, no matter how small it seems the requirement. It takes a lot of effort to come and be open about what somebody's needs are, so don't assume people are just being lazy or taking the mick. Listen to what they have to say, see what adjustments you can make, and kind of go from there. And then lastly, I hope you can see with the accommodations that I've said today that none of them are actually neurodivergent people specific. Like, I think neurodivergent people are often the canaries. They're a bit more in tune and with their senses. And so they are the ones that are calling for the requirements sooner. But all of these things can actually benefit everybody in your company. So whilst making a workplace more adaptable for neurodivergent folk, you're actually just making a more accommodating work environment that everybody can take advantage of. And then lastly, this is a slide that I use quite a lot, and I think it still works here. So if you are neurodivergent or suspect you are, then realize you don't have to be perfect to do amazing stuff in the workplace. And if you are a company trying to make adjustments or accommodations or make your environment more neurodivergent friendly, as I say, speak to your team, make what adjustments you can, even if it's less than what we've spoken about today. But one small change can make a big difference to somebody's work life. So I've been Matt Brailsford. This has been how to create a neurodivergent friendly workspace. Thank you very much.